So hello, friends. This is a great opportunity we have during this shutdown due to the coronavirus to talk to some of our Dallas County candidates. And with me on Skype, which we believe we have made a setup that's going to work for this recording, I have on the phone with me or on Skype with me, Chad Prda. He is running for Dallas County Sheriff. And I really want to take the chance to let him do most of the talking to talk about really why he's running, what he's doing, what the whole point of the sheriff's office is. So to start with first, Chad, thank you so much for agreeing to join me on PCRW's quest to make meetings possible online.
Well, thank you for having me out. With the COVID-19, we've been doing a lot of things on Zoom and Skype, so this is actually a really good opportunity.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. Let me just start with, for those of our PCRW members and others who may hear this interview, just a little bit of your background, how long you've served in law enforcement, the kind of things you've done before we get into the role of sheriff. But just tell us about your background.
So my background began with the Sheriff's Department. I started as a clerk. From there, I transitioned into the jail. While in the jail system, I was a training officer. I was team leader for our Special Response Team, or SRT, and I was a fire warden. After approximately 5 years, I passed on the position of sergeant and transitioned to be a deputy. From the academy, I went into warrant execution, and I spent 8 years in warrant execution and on SWAT. During that time, I was firearm instructor and lead sniper, and I helped develop the building clearing procedures that we're using today.
I'm sorry, did you just say lead sniper?
Yes.
Okay.
We call it marksman in the law enforcement community, but generally people understand what a sniper is. So in law enforcement, there's different terms, but I developed a lot of the entry protocols and procedures that we use today as far as shotgun breaching and some of the techniques utilized by not only Dallas Sheriff's Department, but other teams. From there, I transitioned to be a detective, which was a deviation. Generally in a law enforcement career, you just kind of stay in TAC or the tactical side. I transitioned into the investigative side, and I became a mobile forensic expert. I was detached to the Secret Service programs, did a lot of training with them. And during my time as a detective, I became one of Dallas County's only forensic experts. What that allows me to do is testify in court and give my opinion, not just the facts. So I can testify on other people's cases and testify whether or not they did or did not do the correct standards. I specialized in child pornography and homicide.
So define what a forensic expert is. What does that mean?
Well, what that runs into is I am the individual that will take a cell phone or your social media account, and I will mechanically tear it apart, pull out the programming, and dissect a person's life. What that's used for in criminal investigations is I can tell you the moment down to the millisecond that someone posted something on Facebook. This allows me to see who actually sent the message, whether or not someone is being set up, whether or not they did it. And say, for instance, child-related crimes. I can find out the origin of the video or image and track it back to the source. It allows for a more thorough and in-depth investigation.
So how long have you worked in law enforcement in all the capacities, all put together that you just described?
A little over 16 years.
16 years. Okay, so now you're running for sheriff, which is on the ballot in the fall, November 3rd here in Dallas. And I think a lot of people, even though they understand the law enforcement function generally, they don't really understand the difference between why we have a sheriff's department and we have a police department. What are the differences or the reasons that we have both a sheriff's department and a police department?
So the sheriff's department is outside of military. It is the longest standing law enforcement agency in the United States. It was one of the first law enforcement agencies established. And the sheriff's department is the only law enforcement that does not respond or report to a governmental entity. The only people a sheriff reports to are the citizens. And within our oath, it states we will uphold the Constitution. The sheriff dates back to when we were still calling county shires. We brought it over from England and the colonies set it up. It is the last bastion between the citizens and the federal government.
I'm so glad, and I do want to explore that a little bit more because I think that people had, and I certainly did have for a long time, an unclear understanding that there was much of a distinction between the police department and sheriffs. But to be clear, the police department and police chief reports to the county or the city, like they have, and so that's who they are employed by. You're saying that the sheriffs, and I'm going to get into the Texas Constitution actually talks about what the sheriff does, but the sheriff mode, you are compensated by the county commission court, or the county pays your salary and pays the salary of any people who work beneath you, but you don't actually report to them in terms of your functioning. Is that correct?
Correct. The commissioner's court will vote on the budget that we submit, and they will approve or deny that budget. And that's to the extent of their control of the sheriff's department. The sheriff is solely reportable to the citizens of the county.
Yeah, it is. Honestly, it's an amazing thing in this era, especially when there's so much new focus attention on law enforcement and their role to understand this. So currently in Dallas County, we have a sheriff. Obviously, we have a sheriff who was, I think she began in January 2019, Sheriff Marion Brown. So we have a Democrat in place, and you're running as a Republican for sheriff. But this unique role, I think, is tied to the Constitution, are actually relevant politically. I mean, they are. It's just it is how you see the Constitution, how an individual sheriff sees the Constitution and its guarantees and rights that may impact how you perform your job. So let me start, I guess, on the Dallas County situation. In Dallas County, we have a sheriff, the county sheriff. What are the subordinates below her? How many other people are employed in the sheriff's department?
Non-sworn and sworn, you're looking at anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000. Most likely, right now, we are sitting at 1,200 to 1,600 non-sworn jail officers, and those are just the jailers. You're looking at 300 to 400 sworn deputies, and then there's several clerical staff and other entities other individuals within the entity that are accounted for. Sorry if you're hearing my little dog.
We are, and something I was going to say to our listeners, I am so grateful that we can do this, even given the shutdown. I'm obviously in my home office, and I'm speaking with our candidate for sheriff, and he's in his home. So, regular life noises happen. So I want to go back though so in Dallas County, say that you had a sheriff who was had a different view than others about the right to bear arms, or what kind of rights people have. Doesn't the sheriff's department, you can act differently than the police department. The police are just going to enforce whatever the law is, whatever the edict is of the county commissioner's court or any other entity. The police, that's their job, enforce the law. Sheriffs are actually enforcing things based on, you may be enforcing the law, but you're enforcing them based on constitutional standards. Is that right?
Yes. The sheriff, and as we're seeing in other states in Virginia and Arizona, what we're seeing is the sheriff's oath states you will uphold the laws of the state and the Constitution. Other municipality oaths state they will just uphold the law. So if a law is changed, they have to uphold it. The sheriff is the one that is charged with upholding the Constitution.
Okay, so this is what I want to jump into because it's such an interesting time in the middle of coronavirus in the state of Michigan. I think just this last week, the governor of Michigan has been very, I would call her views draconian or extreme, issuing orders related to coronavirus. And part of her orders include things like designating when people go to the store, whether it's Lowe's, Home Depot, grocery store, whether what you can buy there, whether it's deemed essential or non-essential, talking about when you can leave your homes. And so there were 4 sheriffs in the state of Michigan, 4 sheriffs who said, announced that they banded together to make a public announcement. We are not going to enforce the portions of the governor's order that we see as inconsistent with the Constitution of Michigan, inconsistent with the rights of the people of Michigan. And so we're not going to enforce the ones that we see as outside the Constitution. Do you think that's a valid action for them to take?
I do. And I'm glad to see it. I'm glad that we are seeing more and more sheriffs across the nation step up. It is the sheriff's job to enforce and uphold the Constitution. And when certain elements of the federal government overreach that, then it's the sheriff's job to step in and stop that. In previous years, immigration has been brought into it. This year, it is the COVID-19 and many of the governors and or city mayors overstepping their bounds. And it is the sheriff's duty to step in and enforce the Constitution.
So that means, for example, if you had an order from a city or county, you, the sheriff, can say, "Well, no, we're not actually going to pull people over to ask them if we, the sheriffs, have concluded that an order is inconsistent with the Constitution, such as, you may not leave your home unless you're going to the following three places." And this was one of the objections I believe the sheriffs had, is we're not going to randomly pull people over who've not committed any other violation of law. They haven't run a red light, they haven't run a stop sign, they're not speeding. We're not going to pull them over just to check to see if they're going someplace essential versus non-essential. I think actually this scenario I just described was what happened in Maine. There was a sheriff in Maine who said, "We will not enforce this order to this governor's edict to pull people over." Do you agree with that decision? What do you think
I
about
do.
that?
And in fact, it goes a little bit further than just pulling people over. When the governor instills something like that, or the city mayor, they are expecting the sheriff to enforce it. A municipality police station cannot enforce something like that. On the same hand, the sheriff does not enforce city ordinances. And so it comes down to the enforcement. It is up to the sheriff to stand up to the governor and say, "No, this will not happen, and I will not allow it in my county." And the sheriff has that authority.
That's what I wanted to get to. It is an astonishing thing. I think so little known in people's understanding of authority in America, legitimacy, police force. The notion that a sheriff actually is not defying or refusing to follow the edicts of their job. They are actually doing their job when they stand up to a governor or whoever other official who's issued unconstitutional orders. I think that's amazing. And I'm honestly kind of surprised how many sheriffs around the country are saying, this is too much. What you have put in place in response to COVID-19, careful as we want to be to protect the vulnerable, we are infringing on the freedom of the individuals. And sheriffs saying that, I think, and so you would agree with that kind of, that broadly speaking, sheriffs doing that even in this context of COVID-19.
Definitely. It is our duty. And we all signed up for it. If they feel otherwise, they should reevaluate it. It's written into the Constitution. A sheriff will stand up for the Constitution.
And actually, I was also going to mention that in this country, we have sheriff's departments in a sheriff of county system in all but 3 states. And we have sheriffs in this great state of Texas, where we are, where the Texas Constitution addresses what the sheriff's jurisdiction is. You're a licensed peace officer responsible for enforcing the criminal laws of the state, manage and operate the jail, provide security for the courts, serve warrants and civil papers, and in Texas Constitution, it says regulates bail bondsmen in counties with no bail bond board. So how big or important is the role of the sheriff in Texas in dealing with the the jail population, managing and operating the jail? Is that a big part of the job you would have?
That is a huge part of the job and a majority of the job. That's why in previous administrations, the center has been on the jail system. There is another caveat to that in the Texas Code of Criminal Procedures also states the sheriff will be the conservator of the peace. And that is another large portion of the job, and it's getting accentuated by COVID-19. With what's going on right now, the sheriff is the conservator of the peace and upholds the jail system. Every person arrested within Dallas County will come to Dallas County Jail. short of DWI, public intox, and some of your smaller crimes, the way the jail systems work is a jail is rated for a certain amount of time that it can hold individuals. And so a municipality cannot hold an individual for 2 years. Every individual arrested within Dallas County will have to pass through the Dallas County jail, short of those smaller crimes. And to have a sheriff that is lax on duty, we're seeing the repercussions. Right now in Dallas County, there's 58 individuals testing positive for COVID-19 within the Dallas County jail because of mismanagement and the way it's handled. We are the 7th largest county in the nation. Our jail system is monumental compared to other counties. And it is extremely important to have a sheriff that understands that and is willing to deal with that.
How, when you talk about the sheriff's department having this certain number of COVID-19 patients or people testing positively, what should they have done differently?
Initially, there was one tank, and that tank had one individual that tested positive, 4 other individuals that showed asymptomatic. So they hadn't tested positive yet, but they were showing symptoms. They should have quarantined it. They should have locked that tank down. They should have put in proper PPE and decon equipment, and they should have quarantined that tank. Instead, they took all of those inmates and they transferred them to different areas of the jail. They put them in different tanks, so they spread the contamination. They waited 3 days to decon, and then after that 3 days, they transferred all of the other inmates within that tank to other areas. So you had over 50 individuals that had been exposed to it now placed around the jail system, and we're seeing the repercussions of it. Rather than handling it with proper decontamination procedures, they panicked. Jailers to this day still do not have PPE. They don't have face masks. They should have been given face masks, rubber gloves, sanitizing equipment, and this should have been handled like a true pandemic that it is, instead of just pushed by the wayside and hope it was going to get better.
You know, it's an interesting thing where we are in America right now, because I think at first when the coronavirus became public information, when COVID-19 symptoms were described and the suffering people go through, a lot of Americans were grateful for any kind of action taken by the government, grateful to have the government just keep us safe somehow, tell us what to do, grateful to be told, stay home, never leave your home, don't leave your home without a mask, all the rules, I mean, they're positive things to protect yourself and others, of hand washing and social distancing are one set of things. But even the more, what I think of as draconian orders, at first were received very, almost gratefully by a lot of people. We're now into it by numerous weeks, and people are starting to see a no end in sight scenario. I think more people are concerned about how long this could go. You hear people experts in Washington talking about the idea this may be, may peak again in May, may come back in June. We're going to have a second round in the fall. We may have a seasonal, every year is going to come back. So I think people are more alert to the idea that we can't go into shut down America mode from now on every time there is a virus outbreak. So I think there are people wanting to push the government toward the idea that we just got to come at this at a different way, come at coronavirus at a different way. We can't just shut down America every time, destroy the stock market, destroy the economy every time we see a new wave. We've got to try different things. So I'm getting around to, there is an argument people are making. There were protests in Michigan. They literally, I believe, shut down for some period of time the traffic in Michigan, in Lansing, because of protests over the governor's, what seemed to people to be draconian. So these are the kind of things I think that if you're a police officer, your job is to keep peace, or to arrest people, to say you violated this law because you were told X, you didn't follow instructions, or you. But it seems like a sheriff has a bigger role in recognizing the right of the people to protest and the protection of the right of the people to protest. And that was a long-winded question, but I'm just wondering where you are in all that. Do you see some of the COVID-19 virus protests as legitimate expressions of free speech, or do you think they are, or are they concerning to you? People should just stay home until further notice. But what's your thought about all of that?
So my thoughts on a lot of the protests and the mass gatherings. I would say protests are expressly prohibited or given permission in the Constitution. And there should never be a point where the government says you cannot protest. You have a right to a free speech. And it's an inalienable right. You cannot take that away from the American citizens. So what I would say with protest, it would be the sheriff's duty to go down there and say, you can have your protest. What we're going to ask you to do is stand, 6 feet away from each other. Observe safe protesting. But you can have it. You can do it. It would also be the government's position to issue cleaning supplies, public safety masks. You cannot take away the ability of a citizen to protest, but it is the government's responsibility to protect its citizens. So rather than taking away an ability, they should be issuing masks. Okay, fine, you're going to protest, here's your mask, here's your safety equipment. That's what we should be doing. We should not be penalizing law-abiding citizens. We should be making sure everyone is safe in their county and in their cities.
Okay, one last thing on the constitutional role of the sheriffs. The other big issue where right now it's not front and center because of the COVID-19 thing, but there have been sheriffs who have said in Virginia, for example, we are not going to enforce what we view to be unconstitutional orders or even laws passed by the legislature that interfere with the citizens' right on the Second Amendment to bear arms, to own guns and ammunition, to bear arms. What is your thought about those sheriffs protesting? In fact, some have said to the government of Virginia, we're not going to enforce your orders.
I think it's amazing. They are doing their duty. And though I usually don't give what's called attaboys in law enforcement, we don't give you a good job for doing your duty. We give you a good job for going above and beyond. Many of those sheriffs have gone above and beyond. The Second Amendment to the Constitution was not established so that individuals could hunt. It wasn't established to allow for collecting of food or home protection. It was established to stop a tyrannous government. And it's my personal belief that if any weapon is available to the United States military, it should be available to the public within reason. We already have background checks. We already have a stay period that you can be held off where you cannot pick your gun up that day. We already have systems in place to protect against mentally ill individuals obtaining firearms. The red flag laws, I think, as they are written right now, violate several constitutional amendments. The main one is a lack of due process. If you're allowed to just walk in and tell a judge your side of the story, and they sign off on an order that allows law enforcement to go in and seize property of a citizen, that is a violation of the Constitution. That citizen was not given due process. It was also a violation of the Fourth Amendment. You're protected against unlawful search and seizure. Where is the probable cause that allowed law enforcement to walk into someone's home and take their guns simply because of a social media post? It's an unheard of precedence that is being set across the nation. And it's amazing that sheriffs are stepping up against it. I hope to join that fight one day.
Okay, so this is just interesting times for people who are newly committed to the Constitution. I think in America we had really during the previous administration, we had more Americans for the first time watching the growth of the scope of the federal government and paying attention, maybe for the first time in their lives, to what are our rights? What does the Declaration of Independence say? What does the Constitution say? What our rights are? And so it's a wonderful time to have people revisit the importance of the constitutional rights and the role of sheriff as one who actually, as you were saying a moment ago, is to protect the citizen's right to live out the rights that the Constitution gives them and to protect those rights. I love that. So in wrapping up here, you're running for sheriff. The election is November 3rd. We talked about the importance of the protection of the jail and the running of the jail. That's a big, big job. What are the kind of things, the changes you would see that you'd like to make if you're elected sheriff in November of this year?
So one of the main changes I'm going to make is to morale. Right now, the Dallas County Sheriff's Department is a sinking ship, and you cannot fix a sinking ship without fixing the holes first. Doesn't matter how much water you bail out of it. If we're still hemorrhaging and we're still losing people left and right, we'll never recover. So we're going to address morale. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to stop viewing employees as expendable. I'm going to view them as family and as an investment that they need to make the citizens safer. An example of that, the current sheriff denied my donation of COVID masks. I donated PPE twice. The first one was a pallet of N95 masks, and the sheriff told me she was adequately supplied and wouldn't accept them. I was reached out to by several employees, and we found that to be an incorrect statement. So I reached out and I found another donation. And this time we showed up at the sheriff's door, and I had 9,000 masks. She would not accept them. In fact, she would not allow me to give them to officers to pass out in detail and to give to the inmates. So we sat outside and we hand delivered 9,000 masks to every officer within the Dallas County jail system because they need them. So that mentality is what is going to change. We're going to start looking at officers working and given the tools that they need. Because if I have officers that are better prepared, better educated, they have the classes, they have the equipment, they will better support the citizens of Dallas County. And you will see a change in the mentality of law enforcement. The Dallas County Sheriff, when I'm in office, will uphold every citizen's rights, will uphold the Constitution, and will respect each citizen the way they should be.
All right, great answer, great interview. So if people can go to your website, they can learn more about you, and they can donate to your campaign if they like. Can you tell us what your website is?
My website is Prda for Sheriff. That's PRDA, the number 4, sheriff.com. And that's the same on all of my social media. It's the same, Prda for Sheriff.
PRDA, the numeral 4, not spelled out, sheriff.
Yes.
Right? Okay. I love it. And I will apologize, I think right now, because I think I've been saying your last name incorrectly. This happens to me regularly, having the last name I have, so I understand. But anyway, I really appreciate your taking the time to talk to us today. I really encourage you to be in this fight and be out there. I know it's very hard to do while we're all shut down, but messages like yours, voices like yours, people are looking for candidates and elected officials and public figures who will point out the importance of the Constitution and a commitment to defending it. So, Chad, Prda, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay, folks, we're going to